Yeah. There we go. Hello, everyone. Um, so thank you all for joining us for our event today. Really excited to have everyone here with us. So just so you're aware, we're all going to introduce ourselves after I give this brief intro. Linda Felix, who is joining us from the Atlanta area. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with their video, but she will be the voice from beyond, speaking to all of us. So she is here, and we're excited to have her. So why are we all here? Because we are here because the reality is that people living and aging with HIV are doing so with criminal records based upon the number of people who have criminal records in the US and that intersection with the populations that are the most vulnerable to acquiring HIV. So we have some experts here today to talk about ways in which people can get their criminal records removed and some of the impacts of those criminal records. We're going to start with a moderated panel and then also be taking questions from the audience. So please, if anything pops up for you, please put a question into the chat. We love a robust chat function during the talk. And with that, I'm going to swing to the panelists if they can go ahead and introduce themselves. And I'm going to ask Linda if you can just go first, just because we're not able to see you on screen. I think that's the easiest.
Thank you so much, Kay. Yes, hello, everyone. I am actually the technical genius, right? I'm the only person that can't be seen. I'm Linda Felix. I'm actually in Alabama. I have been in Atlanta for 40 years, but 2 years ago, we moved to Alabama, so that's where I'm coming to you from today. And I'm very happy to be a part of this. I was diagnosed in 1986, so I'm in my 39th year, and I was supposed to be dead, according to the person who gave me my diagnosis at that point, but I'm still here and I am thriving. So I look forward to a robust conversation today.
Sarah, if you can just pop on then.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Stout. I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Prison Policy Initiative. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does research and sparks advocacy campaigns to deal with the harms of mass incarceration. So in terms of collateral consequences, we really write about everything from the beginning of arrest all the way towards collateral consequences. But we've done a lot of work looking at particularly housing and unemployment and the ways in which criminal records and even just moving through the system for a very short period of time can affect people's lives in the long term.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Keene. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Federal Health Advocacy at Justice and Aging. Justice and Aging is a national legal organization dedicated to fighting senior poverty. And we advocate to secure access to healthcare, economic security, and the courts for older adults with limited income, and particularly focus on populations that have been marginalized, such as people of color, women, LGBTQ plus, older adults, and older immigrants. A few years ago, Justice and Aging launched a new strategic initiative to advance equity that really centers to aim equity in all of our work. And as part of that, we launched a reentry project to better support older adults reentering their communities, and to advocate for changes in law and policy that better meet their needs. This really came to us in recognition that the overall population is aging, and that means the population who is incarcerated is also aging. Just, to illustrate this, the proportion of older adults in the U.S. In U.S. prisons nearly tripled between 1999 and 2016. So we're really using our expertise in the programs that we know, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, SSI, housing, and other programs that serve older adults to break down barriers to accessing these programs for people reentering. And my focus in particular is on Medicaid and Medicare, which gratefully are places we've seen significant progress in terms of access for older adults leaving incarceration in recent years. So I'm really happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Pacheco, she, her. I'm the Executive Director of Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity. We are a nonprofit legal aid organization based in, you guessed it, Philadelphia. What we do primarily and really exclusively is criminal record clearing for low-income Philadelphians who have old criminal records. We do that primarily through pardons and expungements, although there are a few other mechanisms, and we're going to talk to you all about some of those today and the differences between those record clearing options and why many people often need both options. We have many clients, a number that unfortunately grows every day. And we estimate that in Philadelphia, in the high-risk, low-income neighborhoods that we primarily focus on, the numbers approach 1 in 2 for adults living with a criminal record, which of course impacts not just them, right, but their families, their communities, everyone living around them, because they are held back from jobs, from housing. They are scared to seek healthcare sometimes. They are held back from educational opportunities, small business loans, really almost every sector of life that you can think about that a person might need to navigate in order to be alive, really, is impacted by your limitations with a criminal record. So I'm excited to be here today and talk to everybody a little bit about the good options, the hope that exists for clearing criminal records.
Like I said, I'm going to take my credit. I curated this panel, and mostly it was bringing people to the space that I really wanted to hear from. So we've got a lot of really great experts here today. And as I actually realized I didn't introduce myself, my name's Kay Greenberg. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for HIV Law and Policy. My pronouns are he and him, and I am also physically based out of Philly. Hence, I have a little bit of a bias for Pulse, as they are known around town. And with that, so Taylor, you kind of, and a couple of our other panels talked a little bit about that. We hear about criminal record clearing and things like that. But since criminal records is a term that has a lot of kind of legal significance, I was hoping you could kind of explain a little bit about what are we talking about when we talk about a criminal record?
Yeah, absolutely, Kay. And that's a really good question, and one that I find we like to start with our clients because it is used interchangeably for different things. We really like to drive home to the people that we work with that a criminal record starts the moment you have a police interaction. And that's not happy news, but it is unfortunately true news. So often people come to us and they think, I'm not even here for me, right? I'm here with my friend. I'm here with my cousin. I just saw you guys were here, so I swung by, but I don't have a criminal record. I was arrested a few times, but nothing stuck. I beat all the cases, or that case didn't even go to court. The DA declined to press charges. And I usually have to tell them, well, look, unfortunately, you still have a criminal record. Technically, you have an arrest record, and for those cases that did make it to court that you beat, you also have a court record. Those records exist. They live forever. It's a very common misconception that non-conviction records are eventually destroyed or expunged. That doesn't happen automatically in Pennsylvania, unfortunately. We're fortunate now to have a new law called Clean Slate that generally allows for non-conviction record, well, not generally, always allows for records that don't end in a finding of guilt or a guilty plea to be sealed, but sealing is not expungement, is not destruction. So I can get into kind of the technicalities of what those differences are, but the thing we like people to know is police interaction is the beginning of a criminal record that may lengthen, may deepen, may get worse, but it's there and it's not ever going away until and unless you take action to get rid of it.
No, I haven't heard it phrased that way before, and I might steal that moving forward, that a criminal record begins at police interaction, because I think that's really important to know, especially in Philadelphia, where you can see, even if you're eventually found not guilty or things like that, minus some of recent changes to law that we're going to get into in a little bit, those are things that still follow people around. So kind of moving forward, so now that we kind of know a little bit more about what criminal records are, we're going to start moving into what is that impact? I think you alluded a bit to the ways in which they can hold you back. So we're hoping to get into some of those specifics. Sarah, I was hoping I could start with you. If you could also take the role of maybe defining a little bit what collateral consequences are in terms of a criminal record.
Sure. So a collateral consequence is really a blanket sort of overall term, and it's any legal or regulatory restriction that stops people convicted of crimes or who have other kinds of criminal records that don't involve conviction from accessing, honestly, really anything: housing, employment, licensure, voting, education, all sorts of opportunities. What is sort of mind-boggling about collateral consequences is the sheer number of them. So there's a national inventory of collateral consequences. And, most of these, some of these are at the federal level, many of them are at the state level. In any given state, there are thousands, over 1,000 collateral consequences. For example, I live in Illinois, there's 1,600 collateral consequences listed. It really can affect everything from things that we're used to hearing about, like difficulties with housing or education loans, to really esoteric and specific things: barber's licenses, whether you can be the executor of a will, things that don't come up in your life until they do. And so often people don't have no idea that their criminal history will impact their lives in various ways going forward. So that's sort of what a collateral consequence is. And I mean, truly, in my experience, almost any area of life you can think of, there's something somewhere that will make it difficult for someone with a record to participate in that area of civic life.
Thank you for, pointing out the breadth of them. I think the latest count is something like 40,000 different collateral consequences nationwide. The one that everyone tends to be familiar with is the loss of voting rights. But you mentioned barber's licenses, and I remember when actually just happened recently. Shout out to Community Legal Services, where I used to work, where they led in the fight so people could get hair braiding licenses. It kind of, collateral consequences are really a way, like, for people that are pro criminal legal system, but believe in, do the crime, do the time. It's a way of extending these things out. Natalie is someone who works primarily with an aging population. Could you maybe add a little bit about some of the specific ways you see this showing up for older folks?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So when older adults are leaving, prison or jail in particular, they often have chronic health conditions such as HIV, as well as physical and mental disabilities. There are higher rates of disability among people involved in the criminal legal system. And when they're reentering they're at risk of, not being able to meet their basic needs because of gaps in public benefits and social services systems, as well as discrimination. And I think discrimination is kind of the way where I see the most impact in terms of access to Medicaid and Medicare, because it's interesting that Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, there are actually no formal legal collateral consequences that attach to accessing those benefits. So having a criminal record or criminal history does not bar you from accessing those benefits. But one of the biggest gaps that we see is that both Medicaid, which is a program that every state has for people with low incomes, and Medicare, which is a federal program for people age 65 or people receiving Social Security disability benefits. Both of these programs have rules that prohibit them from paying for healthcare for someone who is incarcerated. And so again, even though there's no legal restriction on access to these benefits based on criminal records, there are still many barriers to getting access to these programs. But as I mentioned at the top, we've seen some recent progress. We worked to advocate for changes to Medicare to make it easier for people to get their coverage started right away upon release. And this is really important because previously people had to wait until the annual open enrollment period, which only happens from January to March every year, to start their Medicare coverage. So this meant people were facing gaps in coverage, but also lifetime late enrollment penalties, just to get access to a benefit that they have likely paid into through their work and throughout their lives. We also successfully were able to advocate for Medicare to change its definition of incarceration. Before 2025, people who were residing in halfway houses or released on parole, for example, were unable to access Medicare. They couldn't access the special enrollment period to sign up for Medicare. And even if they were enrolled in Medicare already, Medicare wouldn't actually pay for services. So they were essentially, stuck without health care. Medicaid does often step in, but not always, and not everyone is eligible for Medicaid. So thankfully, that rule has been fixed. And then folks on the call may be familiar with some recent changes to Medicaid as well. Many states, I think it's over half, 28 states now, are starting new programs aimed at helping people enroll in Medicaid and get a basic set of services prior to release. These services include case management to assess physical, behavioral, and health-related social needs. And then beginning in January of 2026, so next month, states will be required to suspend Medicaid coverage for people who are incarcerated rather than terminate it altogether. So even though, again, the rule is that states cannot pay for Medicaid coverage while someone is incarcerated, it doesn't mean someone can't be enrolled in Medicaid, but many states were disenrolling people. And that was particularly harmful for people who were in jail or prison for a short time, and they were experiencing a lot of gaps in coverage. So we're hoping those changes are going to actually make a difference.
It's nice to hear about good things, especially as it relates to Medicaid. as 40% of people living with HIV are on Medicaid. So that's actually a huge change for folks. I guess I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that you mentioned because I think they're important. You talked about the definition of incarcerated. We kind of started with the definition of criminal records. As we go through all of this, we're going to be talking about a lot of terms. And I think it's been mentioned before, but a lot of the terms that we're talking about vary from state to state and might even be subjectively confusing, like criminal records. Of course, everyone knows what a criminal record is, but the problem is when you're talking about law, things have very specific definitions. I like to say that we're one of the only professions that uses Latin every day, unironically, because it's meant to be not able to be understood, which also relates to please. We had something about putting questions in the chat. Again, use this robustly. We really like a heavy discussion on the chat, put in questions. This information is only as useful as everyone kind of is able to incorporate it into their knowledge bank. The other thing I was hoping to highlight in what you just mentioned, Natalie, is you talked a little bit about the word discrimination. And I feel like that's something that, in civics in elementary school, you learned that discrimination is bad, but it seemed to be that you implied that in reference to a criminal record, discrimination is something that can occur. I don't know if any of our panelists could maybe speak a little bit to the way that discrimination in criminal records works.
I can cover that a little if that's helpful. Generally, we have categories of folks you can't discriminate against, whether it's because of race or gender or sexual orientation or age or any of many, many, many other categories. Criminal record status is not one of those categories. There are a couple, like literally, I know Atlanta and possibly just them, the couple municipalities that have tried to change that, but for the most part, it's completely legal to discriminate against somebody based on crime of conviction, even if what you're doing has nothing to do with what they were convicted for. So, obviously some collateral consequences, there's a relationship between what someone was convicted of and what the collateral consequence might be. Certainly there are situations where, for example, someone has a driving related conviction and therefore can't get driving related jobs in the future. But that isn't what we're talking about. We're really talking about this very broad category of collateral consequences where any kind of record, regardless of what it's for, regardless of what happened, is going to have an impact on some area of your life.
Okay. I'd like to chime in here if possible.
Perfect. I was about to turn to you, Linda, so you read my mind. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Sarah just touched upon something that directly relates to me because I was living in Atlanta. 40 years ago, I served a 9-month sentence in federal prison. And I'm a former high school social studies teacher. My conviction was for fraud. But of course, I can't teach public high school anymore. Now, I could see me not being hired by the bank, but I'm a damn good teacher, and we need teachers. But that threw me out of my ability to educate in the public school system. So I had to find another way for me to continue to contribute. And fortunately, I was able to do that. But and I'm also glad to hear what Taylor shared about the new program that does expunge these criminal records. Because even though this is, as I said, 28, 30 years ago, I still am a convicted felon. And I was able to have my rights restored because I fought for them. I knew about that ability. and I fought for them. There was no program out there, no outreach for me to find it. I had to work through going through the state office, the registrar's office, and to get that so that I could vote. And now when I do my advocacy, as one of the things I speak out about, and I'm very, very, very fervent about, is voting. Because the people you vote for are the people who can make these changes. I'm very familiar with Larry Krasner up in Philadelphia. Love him. Okay. Fonnie Willis in Atlanta. And then we have Tommy Tuberville as House Senator in Alabama. So you get my drift. You have to, by getting my rights restored, I was able to vote. And so you have to know who you're voting for so that you can advocate for those people to vote for programs and changes in the law that will directly affect your ability to do all of those ancillary things, being a barber or a hair braider. And even with the vote, some of you may remember in Florida, there was a brother there who worked diligently, and they did get the population in Florida to vote to allow people who had finished their sentences, completed all their sentences, serving and probation, everything, and was gainfully employed. But what happened? Ron DeSantis and his legislature, they came up with yet another obstacle to block these folks from being able to vote. They came up with the whole idea of they had to pay some enormous fines and no one could help them pay their fines. So this is why it's so important that we vote. You have your right to vote, and you encourage other people to vote. And that's what I really focus on, because I realize that that is the one right that we have as Americans that makes a huge difference. So, yes.
No, I was going to say thank you. I think you really kind of brought a lot of this kind of home, and I was too busy listening to you to come up with a really appropriate metaphor, but I feel like what you kind of described is like the kind of combined impact of the ways in which collateral consequences have shown up in your life and for the lives of other people who were previously incarcerated. Kind of that you're never able to kind of they're set up in such a way that limits your ability to change the things that limit your ability, and it's kind of you're caught, I guess, in that cycle. If somebody wants to come up with a metaphor off the cuff faster than me, you're more than welcome to. But I did want to just take a moment and kind of move us to so Natalie, you went a little bit into the ways in which and talked about the ways in which there's been changes to Medicare and Medicaid, and things have in some ways gotten better, and a little bit into the ways in which they impacted older Americans. So I was hoping that you or any of the other panelists, including you, Linda, could maybe speak to any ways in which you feel like you've seen impacts on older people or people living and aging with HIV in ways that are maybe different than other members of the population.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. Some, as I mentioned, people who are incarcerated, and I think people involved with the criminal legal system in general are more likely to have disabilities compared to the general population, and then the same is true for older adults. Many people age into disability And combined, we see the impact also of imprisonment and accelerating aging and disability. And within the systems, many people are, not screened or diagnosed, and even if they are, often don't have their needs met while they're incarcerated. So that means when they're leaving, they often need, support and to really start from the beginning to get them the long-term care that they need. They may need help with daily activities that could look very different from those daily activities inside the four walls of an institution. So they may, help with things like getting in and out of bed, bathing, eating, or support with managing finances and taking care of household chores. This support is really only available for anyone in the US through Medicaid. And Medicaid coverage of this is hard to access, full stop. No matter who you are, it's difficult to access. People are often on waiting lists for these for home-based care programs for years. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that these types of supports, with help with long-term care, are not being intentionally included in the Medicaid demonstration programs. So there's, emphasis on care coordination and, helping people navigate access to Medicaid services, but they're kind of missing this whole piece that is super important to older adults, this long-term care piece. And then the other impact we often hear about is people who need nursing facility level of care, including older adults who are released through compassionate release programs. Medicaid, again, is the primary source of coverage here. And we do hear about difficulty finding nursing homes willing to take people who are leaving incarceration. The barrier may be lack of health coverage, but hopefully that will be improving with the Medicaid and Medicare changes I've noted. But the real issue here is discrimination. So nursing facilities can and do refuse to accept new residents. And we know discrimination is playing a role both for people with criminal records, but also for people with HIV. We hear people with HIV are often turned away from nursing facilities. And challenging these denials, though, isn't easy. As Sarah mentioned, discrimination based on criminal records is legal. And then people with HIV are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But nursing facilities can come up with pretextual reasons for denying, or there I go again with with complicated lawyer language, can come up with another reason to say we are not going to accept you as a patient. And so it can just be, it's very difficult to challenge this type of discrimination. And similar issues arise in access to home-based care, to finding a care worker who is willing to serve someone with a criminal record or someone with HIV can be difficult. There is a innovative program in California that I'm aware of, and maybe other states have something similar, where someone else who has a criminal record can serve as a caregiver for someone at home. So I've seen this happen where two people who knew each other while incarcerated, one person has cerebral palsy, and the other person helped him out while they were incarcerated together. And then when they were released, the person became a paid caregiver under the California Medicaid program for this individual. So I think those are the kinds of solutions that aren't thought about a lot, but need to be put in place. It's thinking about employment. Again, this is where the collateral consequence impacts. Someone with a criminal record normally can't serve in that role of being a caregiver, but yet they are likely the most skilled and knowledgeable for taking care of other people who have been incarcerated.
So I'm going to look up the California program because I actually think that's really an important solution to something that I'm aware of for people living and aging with HIV, where they intersect particularly with the LGBT community, because if all of the statistics show that, people within the LGBT community who are trying to age in place, their caregivers tend to be members of the community, members of chosen family, because of sometimes the issues with rejection from biological family. And it's my understanding that when people are incarcerated, they can be limited in their ability to kind of form some of those relationships, or even limited in their ability. I can think of different laws and different regulations that limit, people with criminal records who can live together, things like that. So the California program could actually, again, you learn something new every day. I'm literally going to look up this program. That said, if anyone else, please, if you have anything to add to this, I was hoping to kick the question back to the panelists.
Yes, Kay, just quickly, not only caregiving, but even there's a general shortage of housing for people with HIV, the HOPA program, for example, and senior housing. So if you are a senior with HIV, with a criminal record, that's like having 3 strikes against you in trying to get into senior housing.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially if senior housing is subsidized by HUD. I literally, in a past job, did a lot of representing people who were being evicted from public housing due to having a criminal record or someone being arrested while they were living there. So it's a huge concern, and especially with their limited housing market. I don't know, Sarah, Taylor, if you had anything you wanted to add to this, or should I move on to the next question?
Just agreement that it is a huge problem, especially in Pennsylvania, particularly because there are no restrictions on private landlords and their ability to use criminal records to discriminate against applicants. So we frequently have clients who come to us for record clearing for the sole purpose of securing housing. They were lucky enough to get a job, but now they're trying to find housing big enough or safe enough for their families, and they can't. They don't qualify for public housing. They might find a landlord who's willing to consider them, but once they pull the record, they're no longer a candidate. So we do a lot of sort of educating, I'll call it educational advocacy, reaching out to landlords individually, trying to persuade them, telling them this person is seeking record clearing. This record is 10, 15, 20 years old. They're not a risk. There is no, substantive risk that you're taking on by releasing to this person. But, that is really just sort of person-to-person advocacy. There's no legal protection that we can lean on.
I'll just note to add to that even when there is legal protection, if the record still exists, there's very little that can be done to prove that discrimination is happening, even when it's very obvious that it is, right? So what I've seen a lot in my own practice and other situations is landlords will be, even in landlords in places where, for example, arrest records are not allowed to be considered in housing decisions. Well, when they go look up someone's record, they can still see the arrest record. And, there's nothing, it's very, very difficult without actually getting rid of the record. And this is what goes to Taylor's point about the differences between sealing and expunging and why those are important. As long as the record is there, people's own prejudices will come into play, whether or not it is legal for them to do so.
Yeah, the problem of proof, that's like an entire webinar series all by itself. I if I could actually kick it back to you briefly, Sarah. So in preparing for this, I obviously looked up everyone and their work, and something that kind of struck me about the work you've been doing is work around charge-based exclusions. Just so everyone knows, we're starting to get to the solutions part of this webinar. I promise it's not all doom and gloom. So as part of that kind of um, segue, if you could maybe talk a little bit about why charge-based exclusions aren't necessarily the answer to a lot of the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So this really comes up as we start to see efforts around the country to fix this problem, to make it easier to expunge or seal records, to create automatic expunging and sealing of certain kinds of records. And very often in the process of advocating for those changes, advocates are met with, well, maybe for misdemeanors, but not for felonies. Or, well, maybe for drug cases, but not for violent cases. Or maybe for some violent cases, but not these violent cases. Or, and this is really the hardest one, and I can't think of an advocacy context where this hasn't come up. Well, okay, maybe these kinds of cases, but never sex cases. And the problem with these kinds of exclusions is that you winnow down and winnow down the set of people that these reforms are ultimately going to help. Regardless of people's crime of conviction, the reality is most people will return to the community and be our friends and neighbors after prison. They will need somewhere to live. They will need somewhere to work. They will need healthcare. And excluding them from those things based on a charge doesn't make them need those things any less. And we end up, for example, with huge homelessness problems among people with certain kinds of charges. We end up with, employment problems are huge, depending on what kind of record you have. And there's obviously sometimes a balance to be struck, like I said earlier, about connecting some specific narrow kinds of change of consequences that connect directly to a crime of conviction. But for the most part, these collateral consequences are very broad. They don't have exceptions. They don't have nuance. And so when you exclude whole categories of folks from those protections or from those new changes, you really dampen their effect. I'll also note just one more advocacy point that very often advocates are told, well, we'll do the easy low-hanging fruit now, and then we'll come back in a couple of years and we'll do the harder stuff. And our experience is, of course you don't come back, because when you come back, you're trying to advocate just for the harder stuff, and it's much, much harder to get a bill passed. So we really, we advocate in our work for reforms that include everybody.
That's a really important point, which I feel like makes me think I should shout out if people want to look at it. Yesterday, CHLP did a webinar as part of our abolition series and released the new positive justice principles and talked a bit about kind of what you're talking about, kind of whose voices are important, who's included, and things like that. So I would say what you're talking about is really kind of inherent in all of the work that we do. So I would encourage, if anyone didn't get to watch it yesterday, it was a really good conversation, and it will be up on our website if it is not already shortly. So, all right, like I said, we're starting to turn to solutions. So Taylor and Sarah, or anyone else, but you two in particular, your organizations both work on different aspects of record clearing. So if you could both talk about kind of what is meant by record clearing and some of the mechanisms that you guys utilize, or policy or mechanisms that you kind of refer to in policies to help folks go ahead and clear their record. And Taylor, I'm just going to kick it to you to start.
Sure, happy to. So as I mentioned before, we primarily do record clearing through pardons and expungements at Pulse. And there is a third way of not clearing, but protecting a record, restoring some rights in Pennsylvania known as sealing, which is primarily encapsulated in the clean slate law. We don't do sealing at Pulse. Shout out to CLS. They really are kind of the champions of the clean slate law, and they do a lot of sealing work. But they're all three really helpful mechanisms to help people move forward past their criminal records. Generally, in Pennsylvania, you cannot simply expunge a conviction. So if you were arrested, charged, went to court, and you either pled guilty or were found guilty after a trial, you're not going to be able to expunge that conviction from your record ever, with some limited exceptions, but for the most part, that is a forever record. You're going to carry it until you die or get rid of it. So generally people come to us and they've got a mix of records, right? They've got arrest records, they've got conviction records, they've got some charges on their cases that were dropped in exchange for a guilty plea, all sorts of things. So what we do is we look at that record and we figure out what's expungible, the cases that did not wind up in a conviction, the cases that had good outcomes for the defendant, and then we figure out what's left, the convictions generally, and those are the cases that we assist our clients with seeking a pardon for. Pardon is, exactly what it sounds like, the same thing you hear about on the federal level, except luckily in Pennsylvania, we have a much more egalitarian process where you are applying, going before the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons, eventually getting a public hearing, and then after that, hopefully getting a recommendation from that board that then goes to the governor's desk for final veto or signature approval, I should say. It is a very long process. That is the one downside, big downside, I should say, of the pardon process. It's about 5 to 7 years right now from application to completion. So it's, an investment of time. Oftentimes that timeline is really, really unattractive to people. And I get that, people come to us and they're like, I need a job right now. I need housing right now. I need to go back to school right now. My kids are young right now. And it's difficult to tell people, to look them in the face and say, we're going to be with you for this 5 to 7 year ride, but it is going to be a 5 to 7 year ride. So it's very slow. That's something that we're really hopeful that we can influence people to make changes on at the state level. So it is right now the only way, though, to clear conviction from your record, besides those limited exceptions I mentioned. Of those exceptions, there are 4 roughly, but I think they're very limited. And, as Sarah's point was earlier, you see laws get winnowed down and winnowed down and winnowed down. And unfortunately, by the time you get the final version that comes out of the House or wherever it's coming from, it doesn't really reach the entirety of the population it's supposed to help. So we see that reflected in the expungement statute, in that convictions are not expungible, but you can expunge an underage drinking conviction, which, I don't have a ton of clients coming to me saying this ruined my life and I can't move forward because I drank when I was 19. You can expunge a summary after 5 years. Again, that's helpful. We do use that. We do file summary expungement petitions, but it's not the most serious of offenses. It's not the kind of thing that generally will trip someone up for many years after conviction. And you can expunge convictions after you're dead. Again, my clients are alive. They are trying to get jobs. They're trying to get housing. They're trying to take care of their families. I've never done one of those expungements. I'm sure it's helpful for someone, but generally, people are trying to move forward in their lives, not their afterlives. And then the other way, which is, I think, really the only useful, I shouldn't say only useful, but the most useful part of the expungement statute is for senior citizens who are able to apply for expungement of convictions after the age of 70 following a 10-year period arrest-free. That is helpful. I do have clients, and Natalie and Sarah and Linda both touched on the importance of clearing records even after you're no longer, say, in that period of life where you are trying to get a job or trying to get housing, but you might need, a nursing facility. You might need opportunities for healthcare. You might need to be able to get into a senior living community. Those are things that we do see people come to us frequently for. And it's good not to have to tell someone who is 70, 75, 80, please wait 7 years for us to clear your record. But that said, it's still a very tough process to get through.
Yeah, Taylor really covered it in terms of the the range of problems. I'll just note something that I know that the Clean Slate Initiative, which is a national movement to try and create better record clearing across the country, focuses on a lot, which is automatic versus application-based expungement and sealing. The reality is a lot of folks don't know. Even if there are expungement or sealing options available to them, they don't know they exist. They don't know that they may or may not exist for free. And if they do exist for free through nonprofits and other kinds of aid, people don't necessarily know that they exist for free. And so records will follow people. And there are actually a lot of misconceptions among folks with records about what their records do and do not do. For example, in most states, you can vote with a record. It's the minority of states where a felony conviction is going to stop you from voting, and the tiny minority of states where it stops you from voting forever. But many, many people automatically believe there's this cultural belief that if you have a felony, you can't vote. And as a result, they don't vote. So it's really important. Obviously, it's really important to do public education so people know about that. But it's also really important that we have mechanisms in place to help people automatically and not only when they ask, because while the work that Taylor does is so important, and that 5 to 7 year period is just not going to work for a lot of people. And so that's something that I think there's often a lot of hesitation about automatic expungement. There's this idea that somehow, well, we want a judge to look at everything. But the reality is, in most cases, these cases are very cut and dry. These are long ago records, and we should be able to move forward more quickly.
There's also, just to add to what Sarah said, a lot of misconceptions around who is a criminal, right? And, what is the risk? And we can't destroy these records because we'll all be made more unsafe, which, is patently ridiculous because these people are not in prison. They are living among us already. What has changed from us giving them the ability to better their lives? Nothing. In fact, we're all made more safe by their ability to seek better housing, better employment, etc.
And
sorry, Linda, please.
I'm sorry.
No, please speak.
And as Sarah said, one of the biggest problems is that people don't realize they don't know their own rights. They do not even realize that these kinds of opportunities are there for them to get their records cleared, to go out and vote, to advocate. So this is why it's so important that we educate people on the rights that they do have, because everyone's real quick to tell you what you can't do. But what is it that I can do? And what I can do is to advocate for myself or advocate for those, and that's where I come in, advocate for those who are unable to advocate for themselves.
So Linda, don't go far because I'm going to swing back to you in 1 second. But I did notice a question in the chat that actually I just want to touch on briefly because mentioned clean slate initiatives because it's something I think that's important to mention. Pennsylvania, which was one of the first, if not the first state to pass clean slate. Taylor, maybe it was, sorry.
Yeah. I don't think we were but we were early. I could be wrong.
Yeah. So nobody quote me on that, but I will say that in Pennsylvania, which if you're not from here or haven't lived here for very long, we are a very deeply purple state. You got Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and everything in between. It passed in Pennsylvania when it did with very heavy bipartisan support, almost unanimous in both houses. So even in our current climate, which I feel like is a word that keeps coming up in every single webinar and training that you go to these days, but even in our current climate, these tools are not necessarily off the table. Because if it could happen here with almost unanimous support, it's something that can potentially and is happening all over the country. But I did want to take, oh, sorry.
This is Natalie. I just wanted to chime in too and say some of the good stuff that's happening with Medicaid and Medicare access is also happening on a bipartisan basis. And, we're still continuing to see support for that. It's an area where I think we can continue to make progress.
Thank you for that. It's important to hear about all of the good things that are happening these days. But Linda, now that I interjected briefly, I did want to turn back to you because you've brought up the advocacy work that you've done, and I was hoping you could share a little bit about some of how kind of what that advocacy work has looked like. Do you have any recommendations for the advocates who are here on things that they can do to best work with people living and aging with HIV? Just any knowledge you could share would be greatly appreciated.
Well, working with the working with people who are aging with HIV, they have to be at the table because they are the people who can tell you what it is they need, what they are running into on a day-by-day basis. When I'm new to this Alabama community, for example. So I found an opportunity to sit on the community engagement board for the HIV clinic here at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, because that gives me a platform from which to speak. I can share ideas with the larger community. So I would suggest partnering with community advocacy groups, partnering with HIV advocacy programs like Ryan White and whatever Positive Women's Network. There's a large numbers of programs, and a lot of research universities have these kinds of studies where you can reach people, and they will give you an opportunity to spread the information, just as Taylor has about Pulse. You don't get to know about this unless somebody comes out and tells you. And there's not going to be a cover on the New Yorker magazine,
I'll take one, though.
Yeah. So I think those are the ways.
I think that that is really important because it's the experience of people living and aging with HIV that should be driving these policy initiatives, and that's important to always name and make sure is brought up again and again and again. And wish you didn't have to bring it up again and again and again, but it keeps being an issue. So thank you for referencing that, and also for the work that you've been doing. I just wanted to ask one more question from my moderator list before we turn to the audience questions we've been collating, which is, so Taylor, for you, again, because we're talking about solutions, way back when, I remember in the early days of Pulse, when Pulse was Pulse's founder, Michael Lee, showing up every few days at the Criminal Justice Center in Philly with a giant box of expungements and basically standing by the clerk and filing them one after another. And now is obviously an organization that does clinics and some amazing work. So I was hoping you could maybe speak a little bit to kind of how Pulse came to be. Like, is this some model that is potentially replicable in other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I hope so. Pulse started very, very small but mighty with, Mike was, I think, at the time that Pulse was founded, the only full-time employee. The other two founding attorneys had full-time jobs and were really just doing this after hours and on weekends. And it was really born from them going out in the community and saying, what need is not being met in terms of legal services? What can we do to help? And the overwhelming response they got back was, my criminal record is holding me back. My criminal record is holding me back. So the response was really just filing expungement petitions in mass. And I think, Sarah and Linda picked up on the really good point of, like, people don't always know what's on their record. They don't always know what their rights are. They don't always know how to get rid of it. They know what the problem they're dealing with is, but the legal mechanisms are not made clear. And Kay, you kind of touched on it earlier of how that is somewhat intentional, right? Like, the system is somewhat intentionally designed to be obtuse for lay people and non-practitioners. So that the spirit of Pulse was really like, let's just knock the courthouse doors open with what we are legally allowed to do and file these petitions in mass. And it really sort of overwhelmed the motions desk for a while until they came to a conclusion of creating batch filing. And that was able to accommodate that sort of need. But today we've expanded into pardons work because, again, we were hearing from our clients, the expungements you did for my arrest records is great, but these felony convictions are still here and I'm still not able to get a job. So that was how we moved into pardon work. And, it's, the need doesn't stop, right? Like, it's not going to stop. That's why the timeline has increased since we started doing pardons in 2019. It's gone from, at that time, I think it was about 3 to 5 years for processing. Now it's at 5 to 7 years for processing. It's headed very quickly, if not already there, to 8 to 10 years for processing. And I truly believe that this is one of those instances in which the system has to catch up with the need. And I don't think that the response for us is to stop. I think it's to keep going and to keep putting pressure on that system to respond, because eventually a bubble has to pop. Eventually people have to realize, okay, they're not going to stop knocking. What can we do to accommodate the need?
I like that perspective of just kind of, rather than kind of accepting that something can't be done or something, like, kind of just keep on pushing and pushing the envelope, and eventually they'll have to meet you. So I'm going to turn to some of the audience questions, and also please ask any questions that may occur to you. We'd love to hear from all of you all. So we have several questions that cross over with issues around immigration. One is a very kind of detail-specific question, which just gets to whether or not people who are immigrants, and I'll add to that people who are also both documented and undocumented, if they're able to get their records expunged or cleared, and if anyone knows of any special considerations for immigrants.
I'm happy to address that first. The short answer is yes, but very lawyerly like with an asterisk. Yes, there are no restrictions in terms of your citizenship status holding you back from seeking, say, an expungement or a pardon. That said, I think that wise counsel proceeds carefully with a petition for expungement or a pardon application. I, ask all of my new clients who are comfortable enough to indicate to me that they're not citizens, do you have immigration counsel? Because I am not an immigration attorney. We don't have any immigration attorneys on staff, and immigration law is very complicated. What I never want to do is file something that further jeopardizes my client's status, or file something that memorializes information that perhaps is harmful to any petitions that they may file in the future, or seek record clearing that is successful but destroys a record that they needed in order to seek a change of status. So that's why I, move very carefully. I advise my clients, there are consequences from this that I can't predict. I really want you to talk to somebody who is well-versed in immigration law and give me permission to talk to that person as well before we pursue record clearing.
Does anyone else have anything that they want to add to that? Just because I think most of our questions dealt with immigration. I guess just dealing with maybe some of the overlap between the loss of benefits for people who were previously incarcerated and also the accessibility of benefits to people who are immigrants, especially, and with the caveat of being also a lot of this stuff is kind of rapidly changing as to what, if any, benefits that people who are documented or undocumented can get access to. Are there any kind of specific considerations that you can think of that might exist in that overlap for these populations with access to benefits in general?
This is Natalie. I echo Taylor's point about immigration law being very complicated and just always, making sure that people have immigration counsel and are thinking through the consequences of everything that they're doing. But there have been significant rollbacks in access to Medicaid, Medicare, the ACA marketplace premium tax credits for lawfully present immigrants. So people who have temporary protected status, for example, many of them have lived and worked in the US for decades and have paid into Medicare. And beginning in 2027, they will no longer be eligible for Medicare. New people who turn 65 this year are not able to enroll in Medicare. They cannot enroll in Medicaid, and now they will also be barred from premium tax credits. So they're uninsured for the most part. And then, on top of that, there's revocation of TPS status for many of these populations. And then there's this public charge rule that unfortunately is back. The Trump administration has proposed to rescind rules that the Biden administration put in place to make that policy as limited as possible. And so they're basically trying to give immigration officials discretion to decide whether someone will in the future become primarily dependent on the government for subsistence. And that impacts people applying for green cards, legal permanent residence, and then certain people upon entry to the US as well. So, and even if these benefits or accessing benefits wouldn't impact someone's status, there's so much fear around it. And so there's just, it's really complicated and disheartening.
Thank you for jumping in with that. I was also, and Keith, thank you for clarifying your question. So an additional part that I missed was, could accessing any of these record clearing resources, do any of you think that this is something that could potentially lead to deportation?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Especially in this day and age, especially for someone who perhaps is undocumented and has been successfully flying under the radar and then files a petition for expungement, which, in Philadelphia County, we're required to put an address for petitioner on those petitions. We can sometimes request not to, but it's up to the discretion of the court. We have sometimes to go to court to argue the petitions for expungement. There have been ICE officials in our courthouse taking people. So sadly, yeah.
And I would suppose that not only the person applying, but the collateral damage of family members. You put down their address, now they go and they find grand auntie and then come after her. Yes.
That's an important point. The collateral consequences to any of our actions always need to be considered, unfortunately. We also had a question about, and Linda, you may be the one who can actually answer this, which is, are there any requirements that detention facilities have to let people know on their release that they can get things, that how and if they can get their records cleared?
Absolutely not. No, they don't have to tell you anything, and they don't. If you are fortunate enough to have what basically is like your case manager there, and you have established a relationship, they may share some information with you, but no, there's no rule. Nope. So you're on your own.
And on that note, I'm actually going to take the mic briefly to actually let everyone know about some of the resources that CHLP is about to release today. So folks aren't on their own, but if anyone thinks of any questions while I talk for our panelists, please continue to put stuff in the chat. But I'd like to share, like I said, some information about some stuff that we've done as part of our aging initiative. Sorry. I'm trying to get this over to the stage. Here we go. All right. So, like I said, I'm a staff attorney with the Center for HIV Law and Policy. One of the projects that I lead is the Aging Initiative. And as part of our Aging Initiative, which is a project that is called From the Margins to the Center, which is geared towards dealing with groups that are typically just as much as people living and aging with HIV are left out of many conversations and under-resourced. There are groups within that are left out of conversations and under-resourced. And one of those groups is people living and aging with criminal records. So we're going to be releasing today 2 resources that I am really proud of. And I also am realizing I should add a credit to our previous intern, Miriam, who they did some amazing work to help put these together, which is a community guide to record clearing. The QR code on your screen, you can go ahead and snap that, and that'll take you to the resource. And then that one resource, and then there is, like I said, it's part of 2 resources. So the guide to record clearing walks through some of the information that we gave here, just kind of nuts and bolts, hopefully easy to kind of understand explanation to what are different forms of criminal record clearing. Like was discussed here, what is available and what things are called varies very much state by state. And it has a link on it if you want to look up the specific rules and terminology that is used in your state. But we tried to provide some general definitions about different mechanisms to help people understand a little bit about the options that are out there. And then the other part of this guide, like I mentioned, is in relation to what Linda just said, is a 50-state guide to different legal organizations that either do pro bono or low bono, so low cost clearing of records. There's at least one for every state, though wherever possible, we did our best to kind of blanket the state in terms of places that did regions across the state. There's also, again, wherever was available, though I think we have most of the states covered, information about self-help resources. So if you're trying to do these things without an attorney, as well as the forms and things that you would need to file in order to do it yourself. So the goal of this and the hope of this is this expands the knowledge and information to the community of people living and aging with HIV about real concrete ways that they can use some of these tools that we've discussed, these tools of record clearing, to help get rid of their records and be able to uh, access services that they may have previous issues with. Most of the services and the organizations that are listed, like I said, it's mostly places that do free services or low cost services, are looking at serve populations between 125% or about 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. There is a chart that is included if you want to see where you fall on that. But especially for a lot of the organizations that have specific services for older people, and that is defined differently by the different organizations. A lot of them have either a higher income cap or no income cap. So basically, what that means is that hopefully there are access to free services for many people, regardless of income level, or at least with a bit more flexibility as to income level. And if not, there's at least access to there's at least information about, ways that people could do it themselves. So please check these out, download them, hang up the QR code wherever people can be found. These resources are only as useful as if they get into people's hands so they can use them. And Pulse is there. As one in Philadelphia, and really excited to roll these out and really hoping that they'll have a benefit to this community. So that's my spiel on these resources. And I'm just going to turn back to the chat. I don't know if anyone has any additional questions, which I'm not seeing. Do any of our panelists have any final thoughts that they want to share before we end our webinar?
I just wanted to say how amazing those resources are, Kay. So thank you all for sharing them. We often have people who call and they're, they used to live in Pennsylvania and they have a case, but now they live in Arizona and they're like, okay, so what do I do out here? And I'm like, I have no idea. So it's really helpful to have a roundup like that. Thanks for sharing.
And I wanted to say thank you so much for having this forum. And I hope that what has been shared here will be of help to someone.
This is Natalie. Echo as thanks. And I learned a lot today, and, seeing more connections, particularly about, making these processes as easy as possible, because older adults are dealing with so much as it is. And, we often have a hard time getting people to focus on, getting access to healthcare because they're, worried about having a roof over their heads. So you see how, expunging their record or something is even further down the line of priorities. So I think I really appreciate this conversation and the work everyone is doing.
And I'll just quickly echo my thanks as well. This has been really illuminating.
And thank you all for being a part of this. Like I said, I had it was a guilty pleasure curating this panel, and I got to learn things too. I'm totally still Googling that California law as soon as we're done. I did want to actually address, we had one late breaking question in the chat, but I actually think it's one that I can address because it's about someone's specific legal situation. Like I mentioned, the rules for things like what are mentioned in this question are very different state by state. And so unfortunately, even though I think pretty much everyone, the majority of this call is attorneys, no one would necessarily be able to answer that question. But hopefully you can go to the new CHLP record clearing resource for whatever state you live in and look up someone that you can call and ask that information from. So again, I'm really hoping that please utilize the resource for that. And again, thank you one more time to all of my fantastic panelists, and Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this. Have a good one.